Chapter 1. Dutch Roots and American Dreams. The waters around Staten Island were treacherous in the spring of 1805, when 11-year-old Cornelius Vanderbilt first took the helm of his father's periauger. The narrow strait between the island and Manhattan, known as the Kill Van Kull, was a maze of shifting sandbars and sudden squalls that could trap even experienced sailors. But young Cornelius, already showing the iron nerve that would make him famous, guided the ungainly vessel through the choppy waters with the skill of a seasoned waterman. His father, watching from the stern, said nothing. Praise was not the Vanderbilt way, but nodded once, acknowledging that his son had inherited the family's maritime instincts. The Vanderbilts had been working these waters since 1650, when Jan Edson Vanderbilt, fleeing religious persecution in Holland, settled on the shores of Staten Island. The family name, which literally meant from the hill, would eventually be Americanized to Vanderbilt, but their Dutch character, stubborn, industrious, and fiercely independent, would persist for generations. By the time Cornelius was born in 1794, the Vanderbilts had established themselves as respectable, if hardly wealthy, members of Staten Island's farming and sailing community. Port Richmond, where young Cornelius grew up, was a hardscrabble maritime village where every child learned to swim before they could walk. The family farmhouse, a modest wooden structure near the shore, offered views of the constant parade of vessels plying the waters between Staten Island and Manhattan. Ships of all descriptions, sloops, schooners, fishing boats, and the occasional ocean-going vessel passed by daily, their sails catching the fresh breeze off the Atlantic. For a boy with salt water in his veins, it was an irresistible classroom. But formal education held little appeal for young Cornelius. The local schoolhouse, a one-room affair presided over by a stern Dutch Reformed schoolmaster, saw little of the Vanderbilt boy. He attended sporadically, learning basic arithmetic and little else. Reading and writing would remain challenges throughout his life. In later years, when he was master of a transportation empire, he would still spell captain with a K. What he lacked in book learning, however, he made up for with a preternatural grasp of practical mathematics and an almost mystical understanding of wind and tide. It was his mother, Phoebe, who first recognized and channeled his commercial instincts. A formidable woman who ran a profitable inn near the family dock, Phoebe Hand Vanderbilt was the family's true financial genius. While her husband's farming ventures often struggled, Phoebe's inn prospered through her shrewd management and iron-fisted control of expenses. Young Cornelius watched and learned as his mother haggled with suppliers, managed difficult customers, and slowly built up a modest capital reserve. Her favorite maxim, gain all you can and save all you can, would become the foundation of her son's business philosophy. The maritime world of early 19th century New York Harbor was a rough school, but an effective one. By age 11, Cornelius had mastered the art of reading the water, understanding how wind direction affected the tides, how different vessels handled in various conditions, and most importantly, how to turn this knowledge into profit. He began running errands for his mother's inn, ferrying supplies from Manhattan in small boats. Each successful trip taught him something new about navigation, negotiation, or the value of reliable service. The turning point came in 1806, when 12-year-old Cornelius approached his mother with a business proposition. He had identified an opportunity in the harbor traffic. A regular ferry service between Staten Island and Manhattan could turn a steady profit if properly managed. The initial investment would be substantial. $100 for a proper periauger, a shallow-drafted sailing vessel ideal for harbor work. It was a fortune for a farming family in 1806, equivalent to several months' income. Phoebe listened to her son's proposal with the same attention she would later give to railroad executives and Wall Street bankers. The boy had done his calculations carefully. Daily operating costs, expected passenger numbers, competitive pricing strategies. Most importantly, he had already secured promises of regular business from several merchants. After careful consideration, she agreed to loan him the money at interest. The terms were strict. The loan would be repaid within 1 year with no allowance for excuses or delays. This first business loan would prove to be the foundation stone of the greatest fortune in American history. Young Cornelius attacked his new enterprise with characteristic intensity, working from dawn to dusk, studying the habits of successful captains, and slowly building a reputation for reliability. He learned to curry favor with merchants by arriving early and staying late. He studied the competition, noting their weaknesses and strengths. Most importantly, he learned the value of reinvestment, putting his profits back into his business rather than spending them on the casual pleasures that tempted other young watermen. The War of 1812 would soon provide an unexpected opportunity for the teenage boatman to demonstrate his courage and commercial instincts. But in those early days on Staten Island, as he guided his periauger through fog and storm, Cornelius Vanderbilt was already developing the traits that would transform him from a local ferryman into the architect of modern American capitalism. Indomitable will, strategic thinking, and an almost supernatural ability to see opportunity where others saw only risk. His father's contemporaries might have dismissed young Cornelius as just another rough-hewn harbour rat, destined for a life of modest maritime trade. But those who watched closely, particularly the shrewd merchants who increasingly sought his services, saw something different. In the way he handled his boat, his crew, and his growing list of customers, they recognized the emergence of a commercial genius who would help reshape the American economy. The waters around Staten Island had forged many capable mariners, but they had never seen anything quite like Cornelius Vanderbilt. The age of the individual entrepreneur was dawning in America, and its greatest exemplar was learning his trade in New York Harbor, one perilous crossing at a time. Chapter 2. The Teenage Boatman. The British warships appeared on the horizon like dark clouds, their sails stark against the dawn sky of 1813. As other captains hurried their vessels back to port, 16-year-old Cornelius Vanderbilt coolly assessed the situation. His periauger, loaded with vital supplies for the military garrison on Staten Island, rode low in the water. The British blockade of New York Harbor had grown increasingly stringent, choking off commerce and sending cargo prices soaring. But where others saw danger, young Vanderbilt saw opportunity. If he could thread his way through the blockade, the profits would be extraordinary. By now, Vanderbilt had developed an almost supernatural sense of wind and tide. He knew that the morning fog, which typically clung to the waters around Staten Island until mid-morning, could provide cover. More importantly, he had discovered that the British ships followed predictable patrol patterns. Their captains, products of the rigid Royal Navy system, rarely deviated from their assigned routes. This regularity, which made the blockade appear formidable to casual observers, created exploitable gaps for someone with the courage and skill to find them. "There's always a way through," Vanderbilt would tell his nervous crews. "You just have to know where to look." This philosophy, applied first to navigating physical blockades, would later serve him well in breaking through commercial monopolies and financial barriers. His growing reputation for successful blockade running attracted the attention of the US Army garrison commander at Fort Richmond, who began entrusting him with increasingly sensitive deliveries. One particularly harrowing run in the summer of 1813 demonstrated the combination of daring and calculation that would become Vanderbilt's hallmark. With his vessel laden with munitions and food supplies, he found himself caught between two British frigates near the Narrows. Instead of surrendering or attempting to flee, he made an audacious decision. Knowing that the British ships couldn't risk running aground in the shallow waters near the shore, he guided his shallow-drafted periauger directly over a sandbar, scraping bottom but emerging into safer waters while his pursuers were forced to break off their chase. Such exploits made the teenage Vanderbilt something of a local legend, but more importantly, they taught him valuable lessons about risk and reward. "Fear is a poor calculator," he would later tell his son William. "The real risk lies not in action, but in hesitation." His wartime profits, carefully reinvested, allowed him to expand his fleet from one vessel to three by the time peace was declared in 1815. But it wasn't just his maritime skills that developed during these years. Vanderbilt was learning the art of business strategy. He began to understand how scarcity drove prices, how competition could be outmaneuvered, and how reputation could be leveraged into opportunity. He studied the habits of successful merchants, noting how they managed risk and built networks of reliable contacts. Most importantly, he learned the value of controlling vital transportation routes, a lesson that would later inform his railroad empire. The war years also saw Vanderbilt's first serious romance. Sophia Hand, his first cousin, had caught his eye at family gatherings. She was a pragmatic choice for an ambitious young businessman, familiar with the maritime life, understanding of its demands, and possessed of the same Dutch work ethic that drove Vanderbilt himself. Their courtship was characteristically direct. "I mean to be rich," he told her bluntly during one of their walks along the Staten Island shore. Sophia, rather than being put off by such mercenary considerations, appreciated his honesty. They were married in December 1813, when Cornelius was 19 and Sophia was 18. Their early married life reflected the driven nature of Vanderbilt's ambitions. They lived simply in a small house near his parents, with Sophia maintaining a careful household while Cornelius worked punishing hours on the water. Their first child, Phoebe, named after his mother, arrived in 1814, and Sophia would eventually bear 12 more children over the next 3 decades. This growing family provided both motivation and stability for Vanderbilt's expanding business ventures. By the war's end in 1815, Vanderbilt had established himself as more than just another harbour boatman. His fleet, though small, was known for reliability and efficiency. His business connections extended beyond Staten Island to include influential merchants in Manhattan and Brooklyn. Most importantly, he had developed a reputation for finding opportunities where others saw only obstacles. But the post-war period brought new challenges. With the British blockade lifted, competition in the harbour increased dramatically. Many veterans looking for civilian opportunities turned to maritime trade. Larger shipping companies, backed by old money from Manhattan's merchant families, began to dominate the most lucrative routes. Vanderbilt realised that sailing vessels alone would not be enough to build the fortune he envisioned. It was during this time that Vanderbilt first encountered Thomas Gibbons, a wealthy steamboat operator who would become both mentor and rival. Gibbons saw in the young boatman something familiar, the same ruthless drive and strategic intelligence that had made his own fortune. When Gibbons offered Vanderbilt a position managing one of his steamboat routes, it represented a crucial crossroads. Accepting meant abandoning independence for employment, but it also offered entry into the revolutionary world of steam power. For a man who had built his reputation on independent operation, the decision to work for another was difficult. But Vanderbilt, displaying the pragmatism that would characterize his later business decisions, recognized that the future belonged to steam. As he told Sophia, "Sometimes you have to go backward to leap forward." His acceptance of Gibbons's offer marked the end of his career as an independent boatman, but it would prove to be the beginning of something far grander. The teenage boatman who had defied the British Navy was about to challenge something even more formidable: the monopolistic control of America's emerging steamboat industry. The skills he had honed in the dangerous waters of New York Harbor would soon be applied to the equally treacherous currents of American commerce, transforming both himself and the nation's economy in the process. Chapter 3. Working for the Enemy. On a crisp autumn morning in 1817, Cornelius Vanderbilt stood on the dock at New Brunswick, New Jersey, studying the steamboat Bellona with the critical eye of a man who had spent his life reading vessels. The ship's mechanical heart, a Fulton-designed steam engine, throbbed with barely contained power. Smoke belched from her stack, and her paddle wheels churned the waters of the Raritan River. To most observers, she was an impressive sight. To Vanderbilt, she represented both opportunity and imprisonment. By accepting Thomas Gibbons's offer to captain the Bellona, Vanderbilt was doing something he had sworn never to do, working for another man. But Gibbons was no ordinary employer, and this was no ordinary job. The wealthy New Jersey businessman was engaged in a high-stakes battle against one of the most powerful monopolies in American history, the Livingston Fulton Steamboat Trust, which claimed exclusive rights to operate steamboats in New York waters. "They think they own the water itself," Gibbons had told Vanderbilt during their first meeting. "I mean to prove them wrong." The offer he made was crafted to appeal to Vanderbilt's competitive nature. A salary of $1,000 per year, plus the opportunity to learn the steamboat business from the inside. More importantly, it offered a chance to challenge the kind of entrenched privilege that Vanderbilt had resented since his Staten Island days. The Livingston Fulton monopoly was a testament to the power of political connections in early America. Robert Livingston, scion of one of New York's most aristocratic families, had partnered with inventor Robert Fulton to secure exclusive rights to steam navigation in New York waters. Their legal claim rested on a combination of patents and state-granted privileges that effectively closed the nation's busiest harbour to competition. Gibbons's operation was technically illegal under New York law, but he had devised a clever workaround. By operating between New Jersey and New York, he argued that his business fell under federal interstate commerce jurisdiction, beyond the reach of New York's monopoly grant. It was a legal theory that would eventually reshape American commerce, but in 1817, it was still untested. Vanderbilt threw himself into learning the steamboat business with characteristic intensity. He studied the complex mechanics of steam engines, mastering their operation and maintenance. He learned the intricacies of passenger service, a far cry from his freight hauling days. Most importantly, he absorbed lessons in corporate strategy from Gibbons, who proved to be a master of both legal manipulation and public relations. The education came none too soon. The monopoly's agents were everywhere, attempting to intimidate passengers, sabotage equipment, and entice crew members to defect. Vanderbilt faced constant harassment, including physical threats and attempts to bribe him into betraying Gibbons. His response was characteristic. "I ain't never sold out to nobody," he told one would-be briber, "and I ain't starting now." The legal battles intensified in 1819 when Aaron Ogden, operating under a Livingston Fulton license, obtained an injunction against Gibbons's operation. The case began its long journey through the courts, eventually reaching the United States Supreme Court as Gibbons v. Dane. Ogden. Throughout the legal proceedings, Vanderbilt kept the boats running, often employing the same tactics he had used to evade the British blockade years earlier. One particularly dramatic episode occurred in the winter of 1819, when monopoly agents attempted to seize the Bellona while she was docked in New York. Vanderbilt, anticipating the move, had arranged for a group of loyal dock workers to be present. When the agents arrived with local police, they found themselves facing a small army of burly labourers armed with cargo hooks and belaying pins. The attempted seizure turned into a retreat, and the incident became part of harbour legend. But it was behind the scenes that Vanderbilt learned his most valuable lessons. He watched as Gibbons assembled a team of lawyers, including the brilliant Daniel Webster, to argue that the monopoly violated the Constitution's Commerce Clause. He observed how public opinion could be shaped through strategic use of newspapers and political connections. Most importantly, he learned how legal and business strategies could be combined to break even the strongest monopolies. The Supreme Court's decision in 1824 was a watershed moment in American legal history. Chief Justice John Marshall's ruling that federal commerce powers trumped state-granted monopolies effectively created the unified American market. But for Vanderbilt, the case's importance went beyond its legal implications. It demonstrated that established powers could be defeated through a combination of legal strategy, operational excellence, and sheer determination. The victory changed more than just steamboat operation. It established principles that would govern American business for generations: federal authority over interstate commerce, limits on state-granted monopolies, and the power of competition to drive innovation. Vanderbilt had a front-row seat to this transformation, and he took careful notes. By 1826, when he finally left Gibbons's employ, Vanderbilt had transformed himself from a skilled mariner into a sophisticated business strategist. He understood not just how to operate steamboats, but how to build and defend business empires. He had learned the value of legal expertise, the power of public opinion, and the importance of political connections. Most importantly, he had seen firsthand how monopolies could be broken, knowledge he would soon put to use for his own benefit. As he prepared to launch his own steamboat operation, Vanderbilt reflected on his years with Gibbons. "I worked for the enemy," he would later tell his son, "but I learned how to fight him too." The skills he had acquired would prove invaluable in the battles to come, as he set out to build his own transportation empire on the ruins of the monopolies he had helped destroy. The transformation was complete. The Staten Island boatman had become a corporate strategist. The next phase of his career would show just how well he had learned his lessons, as he turned from breaking monopolies to building them. The era of the Commodore was about to begin. Chapter 4: The People's Line. The Hudson River gleamed like polished steel in the summer of 1827 as Cornelius Vanderbilt's first independent steamboat, the Citizen, churned northward toward Albany. On her sides, freshly painted letters proclaimed a bold promise: New York to Albany, $1. It was a declaration of war. The established lines were charging $7 for the same journey, and their owners had long maintained that lower fares would spell financial ruin. But Vanderbilt, now 33 and freed from his apprenticeship with Thomas Gibbons, was about to prove that conventional wisdom wrong. "The public be served," he declared to a skeptical New York Herald reporter, deliberately twisting the popular phrase, "the public be damned," that many monopolists privately embraced. The statement was characteristic of Vanderbilt's emerging business philosophy, a combination of ruthless competition and populist appeal that would revolutionize American transportation. The Citizen herself represented everything Vanderbilt had learned about efficiency and operation. Where other steamboats featured elaborate decorations and luxurious accommodations, the Citizen was Spartanly functional. Her engine, personally specified by Vanderbilt, was the most efficient available. Her crew was smaller than her competitors, but better paid and more carefully selected. Every aspect of her operation had been calculated to minimize costs while maintaining reliable service. The response from established operators was swift and predictable. Within weeks, they matched Vanderbilt's dollar fare, expecting to drive him out of business through a war of attrition. It was a strategy that had worked countless times before against upstart competitors. But Vanderbilt had anticipated this move and prepared accordingly. He had accumulated enough capital during his years with Gibbons to weather a prolonged fare war, and his operational costs were significantly lower than his competitors. "They think they can break me," he told his wife Sophia one evening, poring over his account books. "They don't understand that I've been preparing for this fight my whole life." His competitors, comfortable in their monopolistic practices, had grown fat and inefficient. Vanderbilt's lean operation could turn a modest profit even at the dollar fare, while they bled money with every journey. The fare war escalated throughout the summer of 1827. Vanderbilt's competitors reduced their fares to 50 cents, then 25. He matched each reduction and then went further, offering free meals to passengers. When his rivals followed suit, he added free wine with dinner. The established lines began to crack under the financial strain, their aristocratic owners watching in horror as their profitable cartel disintegrated. But it wasn't just lower fares that drew passengers to Vanderbilt's boats. He introduced innovations in service and reliability that set new standards for the industry. His captains were under strict orders to maintain schedules, regardless of passenger counts or cargo loads. He established a network of agents along the river to coordinate traffic and maintain consistent service. Most importantly, he developed a reputation for absolute reliability. a stark contrast to the arbitrary scheduling and frequent cancellations that characterized his competitors. The public response was overwhelming. New York newspapers dubbed his operation the People's Line, and editorials praised him for breaking the river aristocracy's control of Hudson travel. Working-class passengers who had previously been unable to afford steamboat travel flocked to his vessels. Small merchants, benefiting from lower shipping costs, became loyal customers. Vanderbilt was becoming not just a successful businessman, but a popular champion against monopolistic privilege. By the spring of 1828, the pattern was clear. One by one, his competitors began to approach him with offers to buy him out or form partnerships. Vanderbilt's response became legendary. "I don't want to buy you out. I want to run you out." It wasn't just bravado. He understood that maintaining competitive pressure was essential to preventing the re-emergence of monopolistic practices. The transformation of Hudson River commerce was dramatic. Overall, traffic increased significantly as lower fares made steamboat travel accessible to a broader segment of the population. Trade along the river flourished as transportation costs dropped. The economic benefits spread throughout the region, demonstrating Vanderbilt's uncanny ability to align his personal interests with broader economic development. But the Hudson River was just the beginning. By 1830, Vanderbilt had expanded his operations to Long Island Sound, challenging established lines between New York and Providence. He employed the same tactics, lower fares, better service, and ruthless efficiency, with similar results. His fleet grew steadily, each vessel purchased or built according to his exacting specifications. It was during this period that Vanderbilt earned the nickname that would stick with him for life. A Boston newspaper, reporting on his growing fleet and his commanding presence in the industry, referred to him as the Commodore. The title, traditionally reserved for naval commanders, seemed to fit the man who was rapidly becoming the most powerful figure in American maritime commerce. The Commodore's method of operation became a template for future American entrepreneurs. He would enter a market dominated by complacent incumbents, dramatically lower prices while maintaining quality, absorb short-term losses until his competitors broke, and then consolidate his position through superior efficiency and service. It was a strategy that required patience, capital, and nerve, qualities Vanderbilt possessed in abundance. By the mid-1830s, Vanderbilt's maritime empire stretched from Maine to Georgia. His fortune, estimated at over $500,000, made him one of New York's wealthiest men. But perhaps more significantly, he had demonstrated a new model of business competition, one based on operational efficiency and popular appeal rather than political connections and artificial monopolies. The lessons of the People's Line would resonate throughout American business history. Vanderbilt had shown that serving the public interest could be immensely profitable, that monopolies could be broken through superior efficiency, and that business empires could be built on a foundation of lower prices and better service. These principles would guide his future ventures in railroads and shape the development of American capitalism itself. As he stood on the deck of his flagship, watching the Hudson River traffic in 1835, Vanderbilt might have reflected on how far he had come from his Staten Island ferry days. But those who knew him well understood that he was already looking ahead to new opportunities and bigger challenges. The People's Line had made him rich and famous, but for Cornelius Vanderbilt, it was merely a beginning. Chapter 5: The Nicaragua Gambit. When gold was discovered at Sutter's Mill in 1848, Cornelius Vanderbilt saw something more valuable than precious metal: a bottleneck. Thousands of eager prospectors were flooding toward California, creating an unprecedented demand for transportation between the Atlantic and Pacific coasts. The traditional route around Cape Horn took months and claimed many lives. An alternative path across Panama was shorter, but plagued by disease and inefficiency. Vanderbilt, studying maps in his New York office, fixed his attention on a third option: Nicaragua. "Nature has already dug most of the canal," he observed to his associates, tracing his finger along the San Juan River and Lake Nicaragua. The route offered a tantalizing possibility, a crossing that could save weeks of travel time and millions in shipping costs. But developing it would require something Vanderbilt had largely avoided: international diplomacy. The Commodore, now 54 and worth several $1 million, approached the challenge with characteristic thoroughness. He dispatched surveyors to map the route, engineers to assess infrastructure needs, and agents to sound out the Nicaraguan government. The reports confirmed his intuition. A combination of river steamers, lake vessels, and a short land crossing could create a viable transit route. The potential profits were staggering, perhaps enough to make him the wealthiest man in America. In 1849, Vanderbilt travelled to Nicaragua himself, an unusual step for a man who rarely left his business headquarters. The journey convinced him of the route's viability, but also revealed its challenges. The San Juan River, though navigable, would require careful piloting. The tropical climate posed serious health risks. Most significantly, Nicaragua's volatile politics could threaten any investment. Nevertheless, Vanderbilt pressed forward, securing an exclusive transit contract from the Nicaraguan government in 1849. The terms were extraordinarily favourable: a 12-year monopoly on transportation across the country, rights to build ports and facilities, and a share of the profits for the Nicaraguan government. The Accessory Transit Company was born, backed by Vanderbilt's capital and reputation. Operations began in 1851, and the results exceeded even Vanderbilt's optimistic projections. Passengers could now travel from New York to San Francisco in 21 days, nearly half the time required by other routes. Fares were significantly lower than competing services, and conditions were generally better. The Commodore's attention to operational detail, gleaned from decades of steamboat operation, showed in every aspect of the service. But success attracted predators. Cornelius K. Garrison and Charles Morgan, ostensibly Vanderbilt's partners in the venture, began plotting to seize control of the transit route. Their opportunity came in 1853, when Vanderbilt took his first vacation in 30 years, an extended tour of Europe with his family aboard his luxurious steamship, the North Star. "Watch yourself in Europe," warned his son-in-law Daniel Allen. "Garrison and Morgan are circling like sharks." Vanderbilt dismissed the warning, confident that his legal agreements and business reputation would protect his interests. It was a rare miscalculation by the usually cynical Commodore. While Vanderbilt toured European capitals, Garrison and Morgan executed their coup. They manipulated stock prices, bribed Nicaraguan officials, and spread rumours about Vanderbilt's financial stability. By the time the Commodore returned to New York, they had effectively seized control of the transit route. Vanderbilt's rage was legendary. "I won't sue you," he informed his betrayers. "I will ruin you." The threat was not idle. He immediately began establishing competing routes, driving down fares until Garrison and Morgan's profits evaporated. He used his political connections to challenge their treaties with Nicaragua. Most effectively, he orchestrated a public relations campaign that portrayed them as foreign exploiters of Central American resources. The battle might have continued indefinitely, but fate intervened in the form of William Walker, an American adventurer who seized control of Nicaragua in 1856. Walker, seeking international recognition for his regime, offered to restore Vanderbilt's transit rights in exchange for support. The Commodore's response was characteristically pragmatic. He provided covert assistance to Walker's Costa Rican opponents, who eventually drove the filibuster from power. The Nicaragua venture revealed new facets of Vanderbilt's business genius and its limitations. His technical and operational expertise had created a highly efficient transit system. His pricing strategies had once again opened transportation to broader markets. But the experience also taught him valuable lessons about the risks of international investment and the importance of political stability. More significantly, the Nicaragua episode marked a turning point in Vanderbilt's career. The betrayal by Garrison and Morgan, coming at a time when he had begun to consider retirement, rekindled his competitive fires. "They thought I was finished," he told his son William. they're about to learn otherwise. The transit route itself would never fully recover from the political upheavals of the 1850s. The advent of transcontinental railroads would eventually render such water crossings obsolete. But the lessons Vanderbilt learned in Nicaragua about international finance, political risk, and corporate betrayal would prove invaluable in his next great venture, the consolidation of America's railroads. As he shifted his attention to the emerging rail industry, Vanderbilt carried with him a harder edge, a deeper cynicism about human nature, and an even greater determination to control his business interests directly. The Nicaragua Gambit had cost him millions, but the education it provided would help him earn hundreds of millions more. The Commodore's next battle would be fought not in tropical jungles, but in corporate boardrooms and stock exchanges. The skills he had honed breaking monopolies would now be turned to building them, as he set out to create the greatest transportation empire America had ever seen. The age of the railroad titan was about to begin, and Cornelius Vanderbilt would write its first chapters in letters of steel and steam. Chapter 6: Iron Horse Revolution. In the winter of 1862, as civil war raged across the nation, Cornelius Vanderbilt stood at the window of his Manhattan office, watching steam locomotives pulse through the city like iron arteries. At 68, when most men would have been contemplating retirement, the Commodore was plotting his most audacious move yet. The New York and Harlem Railroad, a struggling line running up Manhattan's East Side, was about to become the foundation of the greatest business empire America had ever seen. "Ships are the past," he told his son William, who had questioned his father's sudden interest in railroads. "The future runs on rails." The declaration marked more than just a change in business strategy. It signaled the beginning of a transformation that would reshape American capitalism itself. Vanderbilt's entry into railroads was characteristically methodical. He had spent years studying the industry's weaknesses: fragmented ownership, inefficient operations, and rampant stock manipulation. The Harlem Railroad, despite its strategic location in Manhattan, was nearly bankrupt, its stock trading at $9 a share. But Vanderbilt saw potential where others saw only problems. The line's right-of-way up 4th Avenue, now Park Avenue, was virtually priceless, and its charter granted monopoly rights through Manhattan's densest corridors. Beginning in late 1862, Vanderbilt began quietly accumulating Harlem stock. His decades of steamboat profits provided ample capital, and his timing was perfect. The Civil War had depressed railroad securities, allowing him to buy controlling interest for a fraction of its true value. By early 1863, he owned enough shares to take control of the board of directors. The transformation of the Harlem line under Vanderbilt's leadership was immediate and dramatic. Drawing on his steamboat experience, he standardized operations, improved maintenance, and enforced strict schedules. He replaced corrupt managers, upgraded equipment, and instituted modern accounting practices. Most importantly, he reinvested profits into infrastructure improvements rather than paying them out as dividends, a radical concept at the time. But it was in the financial arena that Vanderbilt would make his most lasting mark. In 1863, he encountered opposition from a group of New York City aldermen who had been profiting from manipulation of Harlem stock. The aldermen's scheme was simple but effective. They would grant the railroad valuable franchises, watch the stock price rise, then rescind the franchises and profit from short-selling the shares. Vanderbilt's response created a new template for corporate warfare. Rather than fighting the aldermen politically, he set a trap for them in the stock market. When the aldermen began short-selling Harlem stock, betting its price would fall, Vanderbilt began quietly buying every share available. By the time the aldermen realized their danger, Vanderbilt controlled virtually all of Harlem's stock. The result was the first major corner in American railroad history. The aldermen, legally obligated to deliver shares they had sold short, found themselves at Vanderbilt's mercy. As one contemporary observer noted, they had to buy from the Commodore at the Commodore's price. That price turned out to be $179 per share, delivering millions in profits to Vanderbilt and breaking several of his opponents financially. The Harlem Corner demonstrated Vanderbilt's mastery of the new financial weapons transforming American business. Stock manipulation, corporate consolidation, and strategic investment would become standard tools in the corporate arsenal. But Vanderbilt's genius lay in combining these financial tactics with genuine operational improvements. Under his leadership, the Harlem Railroad became not just a stock market vehicle, but a more efficient transportation system. "The public will be served," he remarked to a reporter, echoing his old steamboat days. "But this time, they'll be served by consolidated lines under strong management." It was a new vision of corporate organization, one that would soon dominate American business. The success of the Harlem operation attracted both imitators and enemies. Daniel Drew, Jay Gould, and Jim Fisk, the era's most notorious stock manipulators, watched Vanderbilt's methods carefully, planning their own speculative campaigns. But they failed to understand a crucial point. For Vanderbilt, financial manipulation was a means to an end, not an end in itself. His goal was to build a functioning railroad system, not just profit from stock market schemes. This became clear in his next moves. Having secured control of the Harlem, Vanderbilt began expanding northward, targeting the Hudson River Railroad. The strategy was the same: accumulate stock quietly, improve operations dramatically, and defend against manipulation attempts. By 1865, he controlled both lines, creating the first integrated railroad system serving New York City. The operational improvements were remarkable. Train schedules were coordinated between lines for the first time. Maintenance standards were standardized. Safety procedures were implemented system-wide. Most importantly, Vanderbilt introduced the novel concept of trunk line operations, treating multiple railroads as parts of a single, integrated system. But perhaps his most significant innovation was organizational. Vanderbilt created a corporate structure that would become the template for American big business. A holding company controlling multiple operating subsidiaries, with professional managers reporting to a central authority. It was a radical departure from the personalized entrepreneurial capitalism of earlier eras. The transformation of the Harlem from struggling railroad to corporate prototype attracted national attention. Wall Street bankers, initially skeptical of the steamboatman's railroad ventures, began studying his methods. Young business students at the newly established Columbia School of Mines, later Columbia Business School, analyzed his organizational innovations. Even his enemies admitted that Vanderbilt had fundamentally changed the rules of American business. By 1865, as the Civil War drew to a close, Vanderbilt was no longer just a wealthy businessman. He was becoming the architect of a new economic order. His railroad operations were demonstrating the advantages of consolidated management, professional organization, and economies of scale. The Iron Horse Revolution he had launched would soon reshape not just transportation, but the entire American economy. The Commodore, studying the growing web of rail lines on maps in his office, was already planning his next moves. The Harlem and Hudson River railroads were just the beginning. His vision extended west to Buffalo and beyond, encompassing a transportation system that would bind the nation together more effectively than any political union. The age of the great trunk lines was about to begin, and Cornelius Vanderbilt would be its master architect. Chapter 7: The Great Railroad Wars. On a foggy morning in March 1868, Cornelius Vanderbilt stormed into his office at 4th Avenue and 42nd Street, clutching a newspaper that detailed his enemy's latest maneuver. The Erie Railroad, his intended prey, had somehow issued $5 million in new stock overnight, diluting his ownership position and costing him millions. "The law!" he thundered to his assembled lawyers. "The law! What do I care about the law? Ain't I got the power?" The Eerie War, as it would become known, marked the climax of American capitalism's most dramatic decade. It pitted the Commodore, now the richest man in America, against a trio of younger adversaries who would define the next era of Wall Street. Jay Gould, the brilliant strategist, Jim Fisk, the flamboyant showman, and Daniel Drew, the crafty veteran speculator. At stake was control of the Erie Railroad, the crucial link between New York City and the expanding Western markets. The conflict had its roots in Vanderbilt's vision of a unified railroad system. Having consolidated the Harlem and Hudson River lines, he saw the Erie as the next logical acquisition. The road was notoriously mismanaged, its stock price depressed by years of manipulation and neglect. To Vanderbilt, it represented both opportunity and threat. If he didn't control it, his competitors would use it to undermine his growing empire. Daniel Drew, the Erie's treasurer and Vanderbilt's former friend, understood the Commodore's interest all too well. Drew had made millions manipulating Erie stock, using techniques that would later become Wall Street staples. His favorite tactic was watering stock, secretly issuing new shares to drive down the price of existing ones. When Vanderbilt began buying Erie shares in late 1867, Drew formed an alliance with Gould and Fisk to resist the takeover. The initial skirmishes followed familiar patterns. Vanderbilt accumulated Erie shares, while Drew's group sold them short. But unlike the Harlem corner, this time Vanderbilt faced opponents who matched his cunning. When he attempted to corner Erie stock, Drew's group simply printed more shares, using a printing press installed in their offices. These convertible bonds, technically legal under the Erie's charter but morally questionable, became known as printed balloons on Wall Street. "The damn railroad's printing press is running faster than their trains," Vanderbilt complained. Each time he thought he had cornered the market, more shares appeared. The Erie's capital stock increased by $5 million in a single night, an unprecedented act of financial warfare. The battle quickly moved from Wall Street to the courthouse. Vanderbilt obtained an injunction against further stock issues, but Drew, Gould, and Fisk responded by fleeing to Jersey City with millions in cash and Erie certificates, establishing what newspapers dubbed Fort Erie in the Taylor Hotel. From this sanctuary beyond New York jurisdiction, they continued issuing stock and fighting through the courts. The legal battles revealed the era's corruption. Both sides bought judges and legislators openly. When Vanderbilt secured a favorable ruling in New York, his opponents simply obtained contrary orders from New Jersey courts. The spectacle forced Americans to confront the inadequacy of their business laws and the corrupting influence of corporate money on public institutions. Boss Tweed, the powerful head of Tammany Hall, eventually brokered a settlement. Vanderbilt would be bought out at a premium, while Drew, Gould, and Fisk would retain control of the Erie. The Commodore lost an estimated $7 million in the battle, perhaps his largest single financial defeat. But characteristically, he learned from the experience. "I'm done with Wall Street's gambling," he declared. Future expansion would come through direct purchase and operational improvement, not stock market manipulation. The Eerie War marked the end of Vanderbilt's career as a market speculator and the beginning of his role as a pure industrialist. The conflict's impact extended far beyond its immediate participants. It exposed the need for federal regulation of railroads and securities markets. The tactics developed, stock dilution, injunctions, jurisdictional arbitrage, would become standard features of corporate warfare. Most importantly, it demonstrated that even the mighty Vanderbilt could be defeated by sophisticated financial engineering. Jay Gould emerged as the era's new financial genius. His defense of the Erie showcased techniques that would transform American business: the use of convertible bonds, the manipulation of corporate law, the strategic use of bankruptcy. "The Commodore fights the last war," Gould observed. "We fight the next one." Yet Vanderbilt's defeat contained seeds of future victory. While Gould and Fisk celebrated in Jersey City, the Commodore focused on improving his existing operations. The New York Central, his flagship line, became a model of efficiency. He invested heavily in infrastructure, standardized operations across his system, and built the magnificent Grand Central Depot in Manhattan. Most importantly, he increasingly delegated authority to professional managers, creating a corporate structure that would outlast him. "Let them have their printed balloons," he told William. "We'll build with steel and steam." The statement reflected his growing understanding that America's economic future belonged not to financial manipulators, but to operational experts who could manage complex enterprises efficiently. The Eerie War's aftermath transformed both railroads and American capitalism. The era of freewheeling financial warfare gave way to more structured corporate competition. Securities laws were gradually strengthened. Professional management began to replace entrepreneurial control. The modern corporation, with its emphasis on systems and procedures rather than individual leadership, emerged from the chaos. Vanderbilt himself emerged changed. Though still formidable, he increasingly focused on consolidation rather than expansion. The remaining years of his career would be devoted to perfecting his railroad system rather than extending it. The old lion had learned that in the new economic jungle, size and efficiency mattered more than individual cunning. Yet his greatest contribution may have been unintentional. The Eerie War's excesses sparked a public debate about corporate power and responsibility that continues to this day. Questions about financial regulation, corporate governance, and the relationship between private enterprise and public interest, all central to modern capitalism, emerged from this epic conflict. As Vanderbilt returned to his office that foggy morning in 1868, nursing his wounds but planning his next moves, American business was changing forever. The era of the rugged entrepreneur was giving way to the age of corporate organization. The Commodore, who had mastered every previous transformation in American capitalism, would need to adapt one final time. Chapter 8: Empire Builder. In the summer of 1869, Cornelius Vanderbilt stood at the edge of a massive excavation in Midtown Manhattan, watching hundreds of workers carve out the foundation of what would become Grand Central Depot. At 75, when most men would have been content to rest on their laurels, the Commodore was undertaking the most ambitious construction project in New York's history. The massive terminal would be more than just a railroad station. It would be the physical embodiment of his vision for modern corporate organization. Every train, every passenger, every piece of freight, he explained to his son William, all flowing through one central point, all controlled by one system. The concept seemed obvious in retrospect, but in 1869 it represented a revolutionary approach to railroad operations. Previously, each railroad maintained its own terminals, creating inefficiency and confusion. Vanderbilt's plan for a unified terminal served by multiple lines would transform American transportation. The Grand Central Project exemplified the systematic thinking that increasingly characterized Vanderbilt's approach to business. Gone was the swashbuckling entrepreneur of the steamboat days, replaced by a corporate strategist focused on standardization and efficiency. The change was evident in every aspect of his railroad empire's operations. Take, for example, his approach to track gauge, the width between rails. In 1869, American railroads used multiple gauges, making direct connections between lines impossible. Vanderbilt decreed that all lines in his system would use the standard gauge of 4 feet, 8.5 inches. The decision, enforced through his financial power, helped establish a national standard that would eventually unite America's rail network. "The day of the lone wolf is over," he told a gathering of railroad executives. "Either we run these roads like a single machine, or we all fail together." It was a stark departure from the individualistic capitalism he had once championed. The new era required coordination, standardization, and professional management. The creation of this new corporate structure proved to be Vanderbilt's most lasting achievement. He organized his holdings into a pyramid, with the New York Central at the apex controlling subsidiary lines through stock ownership. Professional managers ran day-to-day operations, reporting through a clear chain of command. The system became a model for American business organization, studied and imitated by generations of corporate leaders. William Vanderbilt, once dismissed by his father as unsuited for business, proved instrumental in implementing this new order. While the Commodore provided strategic vision, William handled the details of corporate organization. Together, they created something unprecedented, a business entity that could function effectively without relying on the genius of a single leader. The results were remarkable. By 1870, Vanderbilt's unified system moved passengers and freight more efficiently than any competitor. The New York Central's double-track main line between Albany and Buffalo became the world's busiest railroad, carrying more traffic than many entire countries' rail networks. Operating costs dropped while service improved, validating Vanderbilt's belief in the economies of scale. But building this empire required more than just operational excellence. It demanded financial innovation. Vanderbilt pioneered new methods of corporate finance, using stock swaps to acquire competitors and issuing bonds to fund improvements. He developed sophisticated accounting systems to track performance across multiple subsidiaries. Most importantly, he established the principle that railroad securities could be solid investments rather than speculative gambling tokens. "A railroad should run like a clock," became his maxim. Regular, predictable, reliable. This emphasis on regularity extended to financial matters. The New York Central began paying regular quarterly dividends, a novelty at the time, but soon standard practice for American corporations. The predictability attracted a new class of investors, transforming railroad securities from speculative vehicles into investment-grade assets. The human cost of this systematic efficiency was significant. Local autonomy disappeared as operations were standardized. Small contractors and suppliers were squeezed out in favor of large-scale providers. Traditional practices gave way to modern methods. "Progress," Vanderbilt observed dryly, "always makes someone uncomfortable." Yet the benefits were undeniable. Freight rates dropped dramatically on Vanderbilt's lines, helping to create a truly national market for goods. Passenger service became more reliable and comfortable. Safety improved as operations were standardized. The system began to fulfill Vanderbilt's vision of transportation as regular as time itself. Grand Central Depot, opened in 1871, symbolized this new order. The massive structure, with its soaring train shed and elaborate facade, processed thousands of passengers daily with machine-like efficiency. Its clock tower, visible across Manhattan, became an icon of corporate precision. Even the building's architecture reflected Vanderbilt's systematic thinking. Separate levels for incoming and outgoing traffic, dedicated freight handling areas, and careful integration with city streets. The depot also represented something else: the emergence of corporations as major shapers of urban space. Vanderbilt's decision to locate his terminal at 42nd Street effectively established Midtown as Manhattan's new commercial center. The surrounding neighborhood was transformed as hotels, offices, and shops sprouted around the terminal. Private corporate decision-making was now directing public urban development. By 1873, Vanderbilt controlled the largest and most efficient transportation system in the world. His empire stretched from New York to Chicago, encompassing thousands of miles of track and hundreds of locomotives. More importantly, it operated as a single integrated system rather than a collection of independent lines. The age of corporate consolidation had arrived. Yet questions remained about the implications of this new order. Was such concentration of economic power healthy for democracy? Could private corporations be trusted with quasi-public functions like transportation? Should government regulate these new business empires? The debate these questions sparked would shape American political and economic life for generations. Vanderbilt himself seemed unconcerned with such philosophical matters. "I'm building something that works," he said simply. "Let others worry about what it means." But his creation, the modern, systematically managed corporation, would prove to be his most significant legacy, outlasting both his fortune and his name. As he surveyed his empire from the observation platform of Grand Central Depot, Vanderbilt might have reflected on how far both he and American capitalism had come. The Staten Island ferry boy had helped create a new economic order based not on individual genius, but on systematic organization. The future would belong not to lone entrepreneurs, but to corporate managers, not to bold speculators, but to careful systematizers. The sun setting behind Manhattan's growing skyline cast long shadows across the tracks below, where trains arrived and departed with clockwork precision. The empire builder had created something unprecedented, a business organization that could outlive its creator. The modern corporation had arrived, and with it, a new chapter in the history of American capitalism. Chapter 9: The Next Generation. On a crisp autumn morning in 1876, just months before his death, Cornelius Vanderbilt sat in his study at 10 Washington Place, engaged in what had become a daily ritual with his son William. As they reviewed railroad operations and financial reports, the contrast between father and son could not have been starker. The Commodore, still commanding despite his illness, wore the plain black suit of his working days. William, now an accomplished railroad executive in his own right, was dressed in the height of Gilded Age fashion. The scene captured a broader transition in American capitalism, from the rough-hewn entrepreneurship of the early republic to the polished corporate leadership of the industrial age. "The world's getting too fancy for my kind," Vanderbilt remarked to William. "It needs men like you now." The admission represented a remarkable evolution in their relationship. For decades, the Commodore had dismissed William as too gentle for business, preferring his more aggressive younger son, Cornelius Jeremiah. But time had proven his initial judgment wrong. William's methodical, diplomatic approach was perfectly suited to managing a corporate empire. The story of how William gained his father's trust illuminated both men's characters. In the 1850s, William had been content managing a small farm on Staten Island, showing little interest in his father's enterprises. The Commodore, frustrated by what he saw as lack of ambition, confronted him. "Any fool can run a farm," he declared. "I need someone who can run a railroad." He offered William a challenge: take over the decrepit Staten Island Railroad and make it profitable. William's success with this minor property revealed abilities his father had never suspected. Where the Commodore would have used force and financial power, William employed negotiation and systematic improvement. He standardized operations, improved customer service, and built community support. Within a year, the failing railroad was showing a profit. More importantly, it demonstrated a management style suited to the new corporate era. "You've got to know when to fight and when to make peace," William explained to his own son Cornelius II. "The old days of constant warfare are over." This philosophy would prove crucial as the Vanderbilt Empire transitioned from creation to consolidation. William's diplomatic skills helped heal the wounds created by his father's brutal business battles, transforming corporate relationships from confrontation to cooperation. The succession process itself marked a turning point in American business history. Previous fortune builders had often seen their empires crumble as wealth passed to the next generation. Vanderbilt, determined to avoid this fate, spent his final years methodically preparing William to take control. The process included not just practical training, but also careful legal preparation to ensure the fortune would remain intact. This concern for perpetuation extended beyond his immediate family. In 1873, Vanderbilt made what many considered an uncharacteristic decision. He donated $1 million to create a university in Tennessee. Vanderbilt University represented more than just philanthropy. It was an attempt to help heal the wounds of the Civil War and establish a lasting legacy beyond business. The gift surprised many who knew the Commodore's notorious antipathy toward charity. "I've never given anything away," he once declared to a minister seeking donations. But the university project appealed to his empire-building instincts. Here was a chance to shape the future of the South, to promote the kind of systematic education his own lack of schooling had taught him to value. The university's founding also revealed the influence of Frank Crawford Vanderbilt, the Commodore's second wife. Frank, a Southern-born intellectual, had gradually softened her husband's harsh views on philanthropy. She helped him see that great wealth carried responsibilities beyond mere accumulation. Though the Commodore would never become a conventional philanthropist, his university gift established a model for latter-day corporate titans like Carnegie and Rockefeller. William's own approach to wealth and responsibility differed significantly from his father's. Where the Commodore had lived relatively simply, despite his enormous fortune, William embraced the ostentatious display characteristic of the Gilded Age. His Fifth Avenue mansion became a symbol of the era's extravagance, and his art collection ranked among the world's finest. Yet he also expanded the family's philanthropic activities, supporting hospitals, museums, and educational institutions. The transition between generations also marked a shift in corporate culture. The Commodore's railroad empire had been built through individual force of will. William's leadership style emphasized institutional processes and professional management. He expanded the use of scientific management techniques, developed sophisticated financial controls, and created clear chains of command. The railroad system became less dependent on individual genius and more reliant on organizational effectiveness. Perhaps most significantly, William understood that the corporation's relationship with society was changing. The raw capitalism of his father's era was giving way to something more complex. Railroads could no longer simply impose their will on communities. They needed public support and political cooperation. William's leadership style, emphasizing negotiation over confrontation, was better suited to this new reality. The Commodore watched these changes with mixed emotions. He recognized the necessity of adaptation, but sometimes mourned the passing of the more direct methods of his own era. "In my day," he would tell William, "we didn't need lawyers to tell us what we could do." Yet he took pride in his son's success at navigating the new business environment. As death approached in early 1877, Vanderbilt faced the final test of his empire-building abilities, ensuring the smooth transfer of power. His will left 95% of his fortune to William, along with control of the railroad system. This concentration of inheritance, unprecedented at the time, reflected his determination to keep the business empire unified. The decision would prove prescient. Under William's leadership, the Vanderbilt holdings not only survived, but expanded. The Commodore's last coherent conversation with William focused not on business, but on legacy. "Don't let them forget where we came from," he urged his son. "We weren't always rich." It was a revealing concern from a man who had spent his life pushing forward rather than looking back. Perhaps in his final days, Vanderbilt recognized that his greatest achievement was not the fortune he had built, but the institutions he had created, the corporate structures, management systems, and educational establishments that would outlast him. William honored this legacy in his own way, building on his father's foundations while adapting to changing times. Under his leadership, the New York Central system became even more efficient and profitable. The Vanderbilt name became associated not just with wealth, but with cultural and philanthropic leadership. The transition from first-generation wealth creator to second-generation wealth manager was accomplished more successfully than in any previous American fortune. As the sun set on the Gilded Age, the Vanderbilt Empire stood as a testament to both generations' abilities, the father's genius for creation and the son's talent for preservation. Together, they had demonstrated how great wealth could be, not just accumulated but perpetuated, not just used but institutionalized. The template they created would influence American capitalism for generations to come. The story of the Vanderbilt succession offered lessons beyond business. It demonstrated how America itself was changing, how the raw entrepreneurial energy of its early years was giving way to more structured institutional forms. The next generation would build not by conquering new frontiers, but by managing existing systems more effectively. The age of the empire builders was ending. The era of the empire managers had begun. Epilogue: the first tycoon. When Cornelius Vanderbilt died on January 4, 1877, he left behind more than just the largest fortune in American history, $105 million, equivalent to over $3 billion today. He had created the template for modern American capitalism itself. Consider the elements of business life we now take for granted. Corporations structured in hierarchical tiers, professional management systems, standardized operations across vast territories, strategic consolidation of industries, and the use of infrastructure to shape urban development. Vanderbilt pioneered them all. From his early steamboat days to his railroad empire, he repeatedly demonstrated how individual entrepreneurship could be transformed into institutional power. Yet his legacy is complex. The methods he developed, monopolistic consolidation, vertical integration, strategic price warfare, would later require government regulation to prevent abuse. His emphasis on operational efficiency over worker welfare would spark labour conflicts that still resonate. His successful transfer of wealth to the next generation helped create the inequality that marked the Gilded Age. But perhaps his most significant achievement was proving that business empires could outlive their creators. By building systems rather than just accumulating wealth, by creating institutions rather than just running operations, Vanderbilt showed how capitalism could become self-perpetuating. The modern corporation, with its emphasis on procedure over personality, system over individual, is his most lasting monument. "I have been insane on the subject of money-making all my life," he once admitted. But his real genius lay not in accumulation, but in organization. The Commodore built not just a fortune, but a new way of doing business. In this sense, every modern corporation owes something to the Staten Island ferry boy who learned to think systematically about chaos. As America faces new questions about corporate power, economic inequality, and the relationship between private enterprise and public good, Vanderbilt's life offers no easy answers, but much relevant wisdom. He showed both the creative and destructive potential of unfettered capitalism, the power of systematic thinking, and the importance of adapting to changing times. The passing of time has softened neither his achievement nor its contradictions. Cornelius Vanderbilt remains what he was in life, a figure too large for simple judgment, too consequential for easy dismissal, and too influential to ignore. He was America's first tycoon, and in many ways, we still live in the world he built.